At the same time, too little self-love, the white supremacist bombardment that Brother Wahad and Sister Souljah are talking about is real. The white supremacist bombardment against black beauty, African beauty, against black intelligence, African intelligence, black capacity, black dignity.
What we're talking about here is very clear. If you look at Latin America today, in every society in Latin America, and Latin America is essentially a conglomeration of European settler states. The conquistadores went in there and did the same thing that the English did here and everything, right? When we look at the compositions of these societies, we see that at the top are light-skinned descendants of conquistadores, and at the bottom are native people and black descendants of Africans. White skin privilege is a European ideal and concept that was exported with their economic system, their religious philosophy, and it was exported and imposed on people of color. So when we talk about Latinos, let's understand what we're saying here. We're talking about Latinos who for the most part, have African blood in them. And they have internalized racism just like everybody else. When we look at Asian Americans, many of the Asians came here initially came to work the railroads. They were treated like dogs. They were treated like dirt. But when we see a lot of Asians that come to the United States today, one of the first words they learn in their lexicon, one of the first things that they learn is nigger. The United States' major contradiction around the issue of race is white-skinned male privilege. And if we don't attack that, if we don't analyze that, if we don't begin to deal with that, then we got a problem. And I totally disagree with the mayor of Washington, because I do not have a stake in saving a racist nation. I do not have a stake in maintaining American hegemony over people of color around the world. I do not have an interest in maintaining this system that causes the miseries of billions of people one more moment.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to walk away from our investment in this country and the suffering that we've had in this country since 1619. We gave this country her culture. We gave this country her music. We gave this country her margin of profit with the agricultural revolution, though we never got our 40 acres and a mule. I'll be doggone if I'm walking away from 4 centuries of investment in this country. We, too, are entitled to a piece of the rock. I don't care how wrong America was.
Today, inner city schools everywhere are more segregated and less equal than they were at the time I set out as a teacher. Inner city kids I see all over the country are in squalid, ugly, filthy, overcrowded buildings in which not one of us would willingly spend 1 hour. Their lives are more miserable today than they were when I began. By any kind of statistics, I won't drown you in statistics, but there's one which is so devastating, I have to cite it here. As you know, Phil, tracking has come back into schools again. It's become a sort of fashionable way of segregating kids within a single school. Black children, statistically, are 3 times as likely to be tracked into so-called special classes for the retarded as white children, but only half as likely to be put into gifted programs. That is an intolerable statistic in a democracy. And anybody who looks at that and all the other statistics, the fact that black infant mortality is twice that of white children, anyone who looks at those kinds of statistics, or a recent news event, black Haitians being brutally excluded from this country while white Europeans are welcomed at New York International Airport. Anyone who looks at that knows in their heart that racism remains the central moral agony of this society.
African people owned a lot of land, owned a lot of businesses, and did a lot of things. But what happened was the American government, the Ku Klux Klans, and other organizations organized in smashing that effort. So it's not that we haven't tried to own lands and have not organized businesses. It's that if you are African in America, or in Latin America, or in the Caribbean, or in the continent, you will be hunted no matter what you do, because they do not want us to survive and become self-sufficient.
And the Bill of Rights was attached to the Constitution because people without property had no rights. So I did not say that all white people are interested in burning and looting and pillaging. I am saying that the ideals that established this country were based on burning, looting, and pillaging people's land.
Accept your point.
Where is the white outcry against white racism that murders African people all around this entire globe? It doesn't exist. So who are these white good people? I want to meet them. I want to see them. A few is not enough.
But
that might be all we can get.
And guess what? I don't work with all I can get. What I work with is what I have. Listen, you have to have some confidence in the power of African people amongst ourselves to establish a foundation.
We have.
I mean, no, we haven't. We have utter chaos in our cities, and you've got to see that.
There's no black institutions we
You
can build?
can have a program. I'm not saying we've built a lot of institutions, and those institutions have not been effective. The majority of millions of African youth in this country are dying mentally, dying spiritually, dying emotionally, dying academically, and you may have a program, Mr. Brown may have a program, but what we got to talk about is an American government that tracks millions of African people who don't go to your program, don't go to Brown's program, millions of African people, not only here, but all around the world. And if we are not honest enough to say who are our friends, who are our enemies, to know what a friend is, to know what an enemy is, we will constantly be trying to get into people's parties, to shake our butts with them, to get them to like us, and that's not the question. The question is, what can we build amongst ourselves to secure ourselves from our enemies so that we will be able to survive into the future?
Part of the bad news agenda that worries me is that the mood is worsening. There's a backlash, there's a deeper feeling about racism in the black community, and there's a hardening attitude, I think, in the white community. So it's a worrisome time, I grant you that.
But you know, I think that he just did exactly what Dhoruba brought up, which is that when we deal with the issue of white racism, white people don't deal with the fact that they are the ones who are sicker than anybody else in this particular issue. Which is why when you deal with the question of race, you cannot deal with what's wrong with these African people. See, the thing that happened in South Central started with a malady in the justice system, where white people could not see white men who had did something against black men and penalize them for what everybody in this country knows that they did. So the problem of white racism is that we don't look in depth and do these little documentaries on white people and what's wrong with them.
One of the young brothers said, you know, what do you know how to do? He said, rob, steal, and kill. What did Columbus know how to do when he came here? Rob the native people of their land, kill them, and exploit them. What did they know how to do? What is in the best tradition of capitalism in this society? Burning, loot, rape, and pillage. This is something that is as integral to the United States as breathing. And the problem with race in this country is that white people in this country do not want to confront their own history and live up to the consequences of that history. And when you don't confront the truth will ultimately destroy you.
To the African youth, that you have to educate yourself. Don't depend on black leaders because most of them are insincere. And don't depend on white America to embrace you because it will not.
I think white people have to spend more time talking about the injustices which we perpetrate. I'd like to see some books written in the future, not about the problems of the underclass, but about the psychological distortions of the people who created that underclass. Yes. A couple months ago, the Chicago school system, abandoned by white people, not just white children, but white business, everyone, had to start rationing toilet paper. Children now have to bring it from home. It's absolute apartheid today in Chicago.
The issue is more than just money. It's also an issue of control and curriculum, and what type of African adults are you trying to produce within that school system. I was in the Intelligent and Gifted Children's program. I went to Cornell University Preparatory. I was on welfare, Head Start, free lunch, free breakfast, forced busing for integration. Every single government program ever created, I have been
here you are on the cover of Newsweek magazine. It must have worked.
That's not the point, because I talked about white people. That was why I was on the cover.
Alan Keyes said the most cogent thing said here tonight, and that is we are talking about power, not whether or not white people have been fair, not whether they're nice people, not whether or not black people are good or bad, but whether or not you as a community of people have the instruments of defense and in some cases of aggression to protect your turf and or your interests. You can't have 30 million people handing over to another people 100% of their resources and blaming them for 100% of their problems. That is not intelligent. So what we need to do in the black community is decide to be competitive. And the only way we're going to be competitive is to use our resources. And the final thing I'd like to say is this. The primary resource we have as a people is not our money. It's what we know. And what you know is called human capital. And the fleet of human capital from the black community has been enormous in the name of integration. We've lost our brains to the white community, and nobody is there for the intergenerational transfer of information from middle-class people to poor people, so we now have what we call so-called underclass people.
Problem with that, Phil, is that the people of good intentions in the white community are the minority. They do not stand on principle, and they do not struggle against their own racism and white skin privilege. See, the problem is this. It's like men who say, I understand how you feel as a woman being subjected to sexist behavior.
They can't possibly.
Not without interacting with women and empowering them.
Evil is all over. Right now in South Africa, African people are in a system of
This argument is the same as
Look at this dynamic, Phil. Look at this dynamic. Look at this dynamic. I want people to understand this dynamic. You have a black man over here.
Yes.
He didn't cut nobody. No, let me tell you, Stan. He didn't cut this guy off over here. He didn't cut him off talking about he walked through the ghetto. I live in the ghetto. You know, I will cut you off now. So now he didn't do that. You see, what I want you to understand is this: is that it's very important that when we speak, at least when I speak, okay, I'm going to speak the reality of black people who don't have a voice. There's no such thing as freedom of speech in America, okay? And therefore, when this man could talk about building grassroots organizations and power bases, and Tony could talk about recycling programs, and not one of them could probably name one black political prisoner that's a consequence of trying to do those very programs. And then this sister tries to point out, see, I ain't gonna let you cut me off. This sister tries to point out some very basic and fundamental contradictions.
Is it possible that a cup of coffee between these various factions would allow all of us a meeting, a talk? Why the anger? Why?
You are interpreting intensity for hostility. And what I'm trying to explain to you is that if there's no freedom of speech in this country, when you do get to speak, you speak the truth, you speak clear, you speak fiercely, and you don't care whether you like it or not.
Right. Yes, Dr. Keyes.
I just want to say very briefly, the people who are really forgotten, sure, I think the people who are forgotten, especially in the black community, there are a lot of people out there who go to work, who take care of their families, who raise their kids. They are the people who are silently struggling against the odds, who have respected decent values, who have gone out, they haven't committed crimes, they are not in jail. The vast majority of black people have always been decent working class people, and I think that they are also the heroes of the struggle. I think they are also people who deserve our respect. I think they're also people who deserve a voice that will speak from their silence when nobody else is going to. And I don't care who calls me names. I will speak for my parents. I will speak for the people who did everything against the odds to bring decent folks into the world, who didn't commit the crimes, who just did the dirty jobs that nobody else would do so that we could move forward. I'll speak for them any day of the week.
Well, I want to say that I think the claim that there's no conscience among the white people in America is a great example of racism. I don't think the face of racism is any prettier when it's black racism than when it's white racism. And I'd like to finish this. When Martin Luther King started his civil rights movement, he put his conscience before the American people and shamed an overwhelming majority of the white people by the strength of his moral argument. And the elevation of his moral argument was based on many of the things that he had learned from the individuals he cited in the letter from a Birmingham jail. Plato, Socrates, Jefferson, Augustine, Amos, Isaiah, Jesus. He recognized very well that he was fighting for the reform of a racist America on the basis of the views held by the dominant white society, and for that reason he reached them, and he so transformed them that you could pass the civil rights legislation under Lyndon Johnson.
That's such a lie. And there is no because of how his political position evolved. He was killed because he became more independent and more critical of the American
government. Why don't you let me finish? If somebody thinks that you refute what I have to say, if you think that you refute what I have to say by pointing out that Martin Luther King was assassinated, I can point out to you that Malcolm X was assassinated.
That's not the refutation of what you're saying.
He was assassinated by a black man who hated white people.